Mrs. Elizabeth James and the Great Curry Catastrophe. It was a sweltering day in Calcutta in 1806 when Mrs. Elizabeth James, wife of the Right Reverend Jonathan James, decided to expand her culinary horizons. Being the self-proclaimed greatest chef in the empire, Elizabeth had long considered herself a genius of the kitchen, though her dishes had a reputation for inspiring more prayers than praise. Her husband, the Reverend, was a man of quiet endurance, as every meal at their table was a test of both faith and fortitude. However, it was her latest obsession, curry, that would lead to one of the most infamous culinary disasters in British Indian history, involving a stolen wheel of Corsican cheese, and a dish that could stand in for a weapon of mass destruction. The inspiration strikes. Elizabeth had heard about the locals' love of curry, and was determined to improve it with her British sensibilities. After all, she declared to her husband, these people have been eating the same thing for centuries. They need a touch of refinement. The Reverend wisely said nothing, focusing instead on his tea and silently preparing his stomach for whatever horror was about to emerge from the kitchen. The Corsican cheese. As fate would have it, a large wheel of Corsican cashew merzu, the infamous maggot-infested cheese that had caused Napoleon no small embarrassment, had been left aboard Sir Thomas Sturley's HMS the Hound and eventually found its way to Calcutta. When Elizabeth spotted the cheese at a market, she was enthralled. "This," she exclaimed, clutching the oozing monstrosity. "This is what my curry needs. A touch of European sophistication." The merchant, relieved to be rid of it, practically paid her to take it away. The experiment begins. Back in the James household, Elizabeth set to work. The kitchen soon became a battlefield of conflicting aromas, the fragrant spices of India clashing violently with the sulphurous stench of the Corsican cheese. The servants, long accustomed to Elizabeth's experiments, fled en masse, claiming they needed to visit relatives in distant villages. Even the Reverend, a man of infinite patience, excused himself on the pretext of a sudden need to compose a sermon. Undeterred, Elizabeth soldiered on, throwing in turmeric, chili powder, cumin, and an alarming amount of the Corsican cheese, which bubbled ominously in the pot like a witch's brew. The smell wafted out of the house and into the street, where passers-by gagged and fled. The tasting. By dinner-time, the Reverend had been coaxed back to the table, where a steaming dish of Elizabeth's magnificent Anglo-Indian curry surprise awaited him. The Reverend, pale but resigned, picked up his spoon and took a tentative bite. "What do you think, dear?" Elizabeth asked, her eyes shining with pride. He didn't answer immediately, as he was too busy coughing and reaching for his water. When he could finally speak, he managed, "It's powerful." Encouraged, Elizabeth took a bite herself. Her face turned red, her eyes watered, and she let out an unladylike wheeze. "It's just robust. A dish for strong palates. The curry goes to battle." Word of the curry spread through Calcutta faster than cholera. Soldiers dared one another to try it, with many ending up in the infirmary. Sailors from the Hound, led by Sir Thomas himself, came to investigate and brought a bowl back to their ship. At first, Sir Thomas was skeptical. "It can't be worse than the ship's biscuit," he said, before taking a bite. The ship's doctor had to administer smelling salts to revive him. But inspiration struck. "Gentlemen," Sir Thomas said, recovering from his ordeal, "this isn't food, it's a weapon." The French encounter. Weeks later, on the high seas, the Hound encountered a French frigate. Outgunned and outmanned, Sir Thomas devised a desperate plan. He ordered the cooks to prepare vats of Mrs. James's curry, using the last of the Corsican cheese. When the French ship drew near, the Hound launched the steaming curry onto the enemy deck with makeshift catapults. The French sailors, unprepared for the onslaught of molten cheese and fiery spices, abandoned ship within minutes. The curry was so effective that it became a secret weapon of the Royal Navy, though Sir Thomas insisted it be handled with extreme caution. Napoleon learns of the curry. When news of the curry reached Napoleon, he was apoplectic. "First my cheese, and now my fleet," he raged. "This Sir Thomas and his cursed hound will be the death of me." 4 years afterward, Napoleon would caution his admirals, "Beware the English, especially if they smell of cheese and curry." Elizabeth's legacy. Back in Calcutta, Elizabeth James was blissfully unaware of her culinary contribution to British naval history. She continued to experiment, much to the dismay of her husband and anyone within a 5-mile radius. Her curry became a legend, not for its flavor, but for its devastating power, a dish that could clear a battlefield, a dining room, or an entire city. To this day, sailors speak of the curry of Calcutta, and the woman who created it, with equal parts fear and admiration. And somewhere, in the afterlife, Napoleon is still shaking his fist at the memory of Sir Thomas, Mrs. Elizabeth James, and that accursed wheel of Corsican cheese.